Hello there. Welcome back to Sail Faster and a happy new year to all our listeners near and far. So, episode 66 finds us with Will Harris, who's one of the most interesting professional sailors of his generation. Like me, Will is a Brit. Unlike me, he's raced everything from the Solitaire du Figaro, where he was the first solo finisher, to IMOCA 60s. He's co-skippered in the ocean race, and he recently navigated for my friend Tom Kasberg in the Caribbean 600. Will has taken on some of the biggest offshore races in the world, with the Vendée Globe, perhaps the Everest of ocean racing, on his horizon. Will moved with his family to France recently to be at the epicentre of ocean racing in Lorient on the Atlantic coast, and that's where we catch him today. So what I really want to explore with Will isn't just the results, but what life actually looks like as a young pro sailor, how decisions get made offshore, and what really matters when you're racing long distance at this kind of top level. And as always on Sail Faster, we'll tie these ocean racing lessons back to the racing that most of us do, from weekend regattas to weeknight beer cans. Will, welcome to Sail Faster, or should I say bonjour?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pete. It's great to be here to talk to everyone. And hearing you talk about me there kind of makes me think like I've done quite a lot of sailing now, but I'm hoping I've got plenty ahead of me still.
So, Will, let's start with talking about life as a young pro sailor in Europe. So, tell me, what's life like in Lorient? I mean, I know it's that whole coast is alive with French long-distance ocean racing. What's it like to be there and as a Brit?
Yeah, it's very interesting how I'm specifically in sort of the offshore sailing world at the moment. And it's really interesting how I would say this sort of world has changed over the past 20 years. You know, if we look 20 years ago, it was races like the Whitbread, and a lot of it was based in Southampton, or it would stop in America a lot more. There'd be teams all sort of dotted all over the place. And what's really happened is it's become very much epicentered around this specific part in Brittany, the southern Brittany coast. And you've got a couple of places. You've got Lorient, which is where I live now, and there's Port La Forêt just up the road. And you've also got Les Sables d'Olonne, where the Vendée Globe starts. And this is really where all the teams are based now. This is where all the teams are for the Vendée Globe. This is where the teams are for the ocean race. And it's where you can really find all the expertise and all the sort of top level sailors, but also top level industry workers. You know, people need to build the boats. There's a lot of technology around the boats now. And it was really fascinating for me when I first sort of started to call sailing or offshore sailing my career, to really understand this and to see, okay, I can't do this particularly well in England at the moment. I'm going to have to uproot my life and figure out a way to make it work and go and live in a country where I don't speak the language. You know, 10 years ago, I really didn't speak a word of French, didn't really know anyone. It's not like I've got my friends or family out there, and I've really got to try and set myself up here and try and make a name for myself. So 10 years on, you know, last year I moved here with my family. I've got a 13-month-old son now, and here with my Spanish wife, we're a little bit in between the two cultures here in France. We're based out here in Lorient, and we're making a life for it in the professional offshore sailing world. So absolutely loving it, but it's definitely not been an easy journey, that's for sure.
Why does this part of France have this sort of gravitational pull for ocean racing? Years ago, it would be Peter Blake or some of the English sailors, but the Vendée Globe is dominated by French sailors, obviously.
What's really happened, I think, is we sort of had two different pathways of sort of the Everests of ocean sailing, which is the Vendée Globe, the solo around the world race, and the ocean race, which was formerly the Volvo Ocean Race, and before that it was the Whitbread race. And that was a crewed around the world race. And the Vendée Globe has always been very French. It's only been won by French sailors so far, and a lot of the projects were coming from there. But what we've seen in recent years is now the ocean race is using these IMOCA 60s to race in the ocean race as well. What makes the most sense is to have a project which does the Vendée Globe and the ocean race. What that's meant is all these ocean race teams have now sort of based themselves in France, and they're trying to use the sort of the talent or pick the most skilled sort of IMOCA sailors there are out there. And they're really, you know, all the ones with the most experience are really based in France. So that's kind of why it's made the most sense. If we look back 20 years ago, when you imagined to be a professional sailor, you were probably trying to become a trimmer or a watch leader on a boat, like for the Volvo Ocean Race, where you'd have very specific roles. Nowadays, you have 3 or 4 crew members on the IMOCA. You're all navigators, you're all trimmers, you're all sail changers. You have to really muck in and do a bit of everything. You don't have these specific roles anymore where one person is responsible for purely fixing the sails and trimming them, and one person is a driver and they just drive the boat, and one person's a pure navigator. You're really, really much more polyvalent sailors. You're all-round sailors, and that's sort of where this talent field is being picked up from, is France, where they're coming through this background of Solitaire du Figaro sailors, which is the very well-known solo race that happens around here in Brittany. And you've got the Class 40 scene as well, the mini transat scene as well, and you're sort of picking from this talent pool all the sailors that then go into IMOCAs and have that experience of having to sail boats solo, and therefore having a very well-rounded nature. And that's really the best explanation I have for it. It's simply because the dynamic of the boats have changed, the technology's changing because the boats are much more fast and violent. Everything has to happen inside, and therefore you have less space for a big crew of 10 people. You can really only have 4 or 5 people maximum on the boat. And that's really what's led to this sort of epicenter of the world being based here in France. And yeah, very interesting to see how the world of offshore and ocean racing has changed. And I've sort of been, my 10 years so far in professional sailing has been in this transition period. So it's been very fascinating for me to see it as an Anglo-Saxon sailor living this life in France now.
So you're in Lorient, obviously. What's the specific project you're working on right now? What's your big goal right now?
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough to be part of a really interesting team at the moment. It's called Team Militia, and we're an IMOCA 60 team. The lead skipper is Boris Herrmann, a German sailor, and I've been part of the team since 2019, and I've really got to watch the team grow from almost nothing. You know, when Boris first started I think the project started in 2017, 2018. He had almost no money for the project, not many sponsors. And when I joined him as co-skipper for a double-handed race across the Atlantic, my first IMOCA race, you know, we had nothing. We were sticking the boat together. We didn't have a rib to push the boat off the dock. There was no budget, and it was built purely on passion, I would say. And that was 6 years ago. And since then, the team has massively expanded. We've got a much bigger following. We have a big climate action now. Sort of that's our mission alongside our sailing. And we managed to secure funding to build a new boat for the previous ocean race. And we're in the process of building a new boat for the upcoming ocean race in 2027. So it's a very exciting time. We're in a transition phase. We're sort of waiting for the new boat to arrive. There's plenty of other bits of sailing going on as well, but that's sort of how I balance my time. I'll spend, I would say, 70% of my time with this project. You know, I do a lot of sailing with them. I've done an ocean race around the world. I'm co-skipper for Boris for the Vendée Globe. You know, I can't actually go on the boat, but if he was to break his leg the week before the start, I go and take his place. And I'm really preparing these sorts of races as if I was going to take the start. You know, it's my dream to do it one day. So what better way to prepare myself than to be the reserve skipper for a race like that? But that's sort of 70% of my time. And the other 30%, I'm really trying to fill up with other sailing. You know, I'm trying to do, like last year, I met your friend Tom Kasberg. We raced in the Caribbean 600, which I was navigator for. Also did the Admiral's Cup this past year. And this really to sort of freshen up my navigation skills. The more you can get out on the water, the more experiences you have, the better you generally are, the better you are at making these tough decisions. So yeah, very interesting time for me to be part of this project. And, you know, I've always got that dream of myself doing the Vendée Globe and to try and become one of the first non-French winners of the race.
The boat you're preparing now is an IMOCA.
Yes, IMOCA 60 each 4 years. This new cycle happens. The Vendée Globe happens every 4 years. And you basically need the 3.5 years between every cycle to build. You know, the build process is the best part of 2 years. The testing period is extremely full on. You know, you've got to figure out what's wrong with the boat, what's right, how to really optimize it. And that's a big part of my job. You know, I'm trying to, while Boris is in charge of this big project, I'm really trying to take on all those optimization bits. But the fun bits, as I like to say, you know, I'm trying to find all those tweaks and how do we make these boats go faster? And that's what's the really exciting thing about IMOCA 60s. I love one design racing. There's nothing wrong with it at all, but it's amazing to see how these boats have gone from, you know, very standard displacement planing boats to fully flying now. And I really think this next generation will be flying above the water a lot of the time. That's really exciting to be part of and to come up with these concepts of ideas of how to get these boats to really take off. And each 4 years, this new generation of boats, this new cycle of boats will come out, and we're probably number 2 or 3 in the pecking order who's going to be launched. So
it's a new build. I know a lot of the Vendée Globe sailors will find a boat from the previous generation and update it and race that, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly correct. You'll
But
see,
you're
that,
going for a new build. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, we go for a whole new build, and it's really to get the latest sort of technology and to make sure we have
Mm.
the most up to date boat possible. And whenever you take a previous generation boat, it's usually slightly outdated. We've learned lots of things. We've done another Vendée Globe, and all those learnings and new technologies we can put into this new boat. So, in theory, fingers crossed, it's going to be faster than the older one. But you're never sure until you hit the water.
The generational difference, is it around as we learn about, I mean, foiling is relatively new technology. We learn new things about foils. Is it about the construction techniques? Is it about the design of the hull? Is it about this rig and sails?
It's
Where do the leaps tend to be made?
it's really fascinating. Each cycle, it was different priorities each time. There's an endless list of things that we can optimize. If you look like an F1 team or America's Cup team, they have hundreds of engineers working on all these tiny little optimization details. And for us, we don't have quite those resources. We don't have those sorts of budgets. So we're really trying to prioritize. Okay, what do we think is the most important thing? So a lot of it's hull shape, of course. Hull shape's very important. The foils and rudders as well, all the appendages of the boat. But that's sort of the big things which we'll see big differences in every 4 years. But then it's coming down to the details. It's coming down to how do we do the ballasts? How do we do the electronic systems? How do we do the structure in the boat? And we're really trying to combine the experiences of the sailors and what the engineers have sort of learned and designed themselves. We're really trying to combine these in the most efficient way possible to give us the best results possible for, in the most efficient way without using so many resources. So then we have more time for engineers to work on other things. And that's what's really fascinating. We finished a race recently across the Atlantic, and we get to see the boat that won. And, we can definitely point out some things of why we think they won it. And, that's definitely going straight into our thoughts for the new boat. And it's really fascinating to race and then come back to the drawing board and put that technology to test.
It's so interesting because sailing boats have been around for centuries. And it's so interesting how even over the last sort of 10 years, there's been this acceleration in technology and dynamics that people are still discovering how to create the right foils and materials that go in it. So it's really interesting. I do want to talk a little bit later about the experience of racing one of these IMOCAs, because I had an interesting conversation about that the other day. But I want to go back to a moment when you thought that I might actually be able to make this pastime and sport into something I would do professionally.
Yes. I grew up in southwest London, and I was racing on the reservoirs there. I was part of the British sailing team, admittedly, but I really found that sort of love for the competitiveness of sailing and trying to get a boat to go around the coast as fast as possible. But I'd never experienced the ocean sailing until I went to study in Southampton University. I went to study oceanography there, and that's really where I got my first opportunity on a few different yachts, on the Figaro notably, and first time I was using a winch and things like this, and also sailing overnight and really falling in love with that sort of aspect of sailing. And I guess that was around the same time where I sort of realized that people were getting paid for this. They were finding sponsors, they were finding teams, they were able to turn their passion into their career. And I sort of went from, thinking, right, I'm gonna have to finish university and get a proper job to right. I think I've got a year of this. I think I'd managed to been selected for something called the Artemis Offshore Academy. It was an
Yeah.
initiative to get British sailors closer on their route towards the Vendée Globe. I was one of 18 sailors who went through this pathway over 8 years or so. And I was lucky enough that they were funding me to go to France and race in the Solitaire du Figaro for 1 year. Not paid, not as a paid job or anything like that. We had enough to go and take the start line. I said, right, that's the best offer if I'm going to get. Got to give this a shot. And if at the end of it I didn't like, I don't like it, or I think that's it, then I'll go find myself a real job. If it doesn't keep going up, then I'll pack it in and apply for a job. And I absolutely loved the year. That was the year that I won the rookie category, the first newcomer to the race. The Solitaire du Figaro, usually the winners have done the race 10 times or so, over 10 years before they actually win it. Sort of shows the level of the fleet, how hard it is. So to get the newcomer trophy was a really big thing for me, and it actually sort of gave me my first foot rung, I would guess, on the professional navigation career. And that's when I sort of picked up my next job, and I I sort of saw the pathway was going up, and I could carry on with this, and I could keep picking up jobs and saying yes to absolutely every opportunity I could to sail, and just give it a shot. And yeah, here I am 11 years later, and I'm part of one of the top IMOCA teams. So yeah, I think it was really about trying to say yes to everything. And whenever there was quiet moments, I was always, I remember a few times applying for various other jobs, applying to be a meteorologist or a bit more desk jobs, and thinking, right, that's it. I'm not going to get at the next thing, and I haven't got anything lined up for the next 6 months. And then suddenly someone would call me and say, "Oh, we need you for this sailing race or this event." And the next day I was packing my bags and off to go do the next event. And that's the challenge of being a professional sailor. You don't have that security like a normal job. You don't really know what you're doing in the next few weeks, let alone the next year. So, and you have to sacrifice a lot for that. You might have had a family event or things like this, or various things that weekends that you suddenly have to say, no, I can't do this. This might be my opportunity, my break to do it. And I think slowly by trying to fill my calendar with these sorts of events and persevering, then eventually I got picked up by Boris, and to be eventually to be part of the project that I am now, which is his team Militia, and is definitely one of the more stable teams in the industry. And yeah, which I'm very lucky to be part of.
You've clearly gravitated through your career towards long distance racing rather than the sort of the short course formats. Why is that?
Yeah, it was a very interesting, sort of quite abrupt transition for me, I would say, in my life. I'd really never sailed yachts before the age of 19, I think it was. I'd I'd never been on the open sea that much, only in dinghies where you go 1 or 2 miles from Weymouth Harbour or something like this. That's as about as offshore as I went. And that's just because that's the pathway of Olympic sailing. You really train every weekend. You compete in whatever reservoirs or lakes around the country to follow the British sailing program. And that's how we ended up with the most talented, very talented Olympic sailors, because you follow this regime. But I was really happy, when I did get this experience to go offshore. I think it was part of the Artemis Offshore Academy trials, and they took us. We had to sail around the Isle of Wight overnight. Luckily, it was double-handed, because the guy I was sailing with, he had done navigation before, and I hadn't done it in my life, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was just totally being told. But suddenly the sport of racing for an hour or so, or an hour and a half, which I loved, but I'm not such an intense person. I'm not so good at that really short inshore stuff. I couldn't tell you why at the moment, but suddenly I was going from this hour and a half stuff to this overnight racing, or 24 hours. And you didn't just have to be good for an hour, you had to be good for 24 hours. And that whole endurance aspect of it, I just absolutely love it. You have to manage yourself, you have to manage the boat, you have to, it's always changing environment. It's never the same race course. And I think that's really what drew it to me. It's very much like a lot of people are doing triathlon and ultra marathon running. And this is really my ultra marathon is ocean racing. And it's also, now we get to the longer races, things like the ocean race, where our longest leg was 36 days. You have those moments where you wake up for your watch. Not every day is like this, but you wake up for your watch, you get to make yourself a coffee, and you get to go on deck, and you get to look at the open ocean. And, every time I do that, I just think, how many people are there actually in the world who get to do that? What percentage of the population get to look at an open, empty ocean and see the sunrise coming up in the middle of the South Pacific? And I think that's something that will never stop sort of being in my blood and making me want to keep going back. And, as much as I miss, now I have a family, I can't just be at sea the whole time. I would love to come back and see them as well, but I'll always have that desire to go back out to the ocean and have those experiences and feeling, because I think it's such a unique thing. And I think I've always been a person who searches to do the thing that no one else is doing. And this is definitely one of those things.
Do you get afraid?
Um, I would say the short answer is no, but no, I think the reason I'm not afraid is I trust myself. I'm a very risk aware person. I think I can say that because I've never broken a bone or things like that. I'm not saying I'm a wuss or anything. It's just I'll always assess something before I go and
You're
jump.
definitely not worse. There's no danger of that.
I'll never jump into it. So, and that goes for the same on the boat. that being said, there's definitely moments where I have been very scared. Something happens, you hit something on the boat, you have a sudden noise, a sail suddenly falls in the water, and it's those moments which you don't know what's going on, and those split seconds which suddenly your heart goes, you know, into your stomach. It's everything suddenly changes, and probably the one of the most sort of worrying moments for me or scary moments for me was when we were in the Southern Ocean and leg 3 of the ocean race coming towards Cape Horn, and our crewmate Rosie, we had 7-meter waves, and with biggest sea state I've ever been in. 7-meter waves is absolutely massive, but
Mm.
it was coming side on the boat, and every 5 or 10 minutes we were totally losing control. A wave would break over us and it would just knock this 60-foot boat over sideways. And I was sleeping in the bunk, and Rosie was in one slightly above me, and
Were
suddenly
you actually sleeping during this?
no, I wasn't asleep at the moment. Definitely not asleep. I was clinging on in the bunk,
Ugh.
and Rosie was asleep. She somehow managed to fall asleep, but it wiped us out, and it lifted Rosie out the bunk up above the sort of wall we have for it, and threw her the whole way across the boat. And we could just hear this, absolutely sickening crunch as she hit the other side. And then, it took us a couple of minutes to find her. She was, pretty unconscious at this moment, but because she'd fallen so far across the boat, we just didn't believe that she was all the way down there. And yeah, that was we'd been trained medically, but we're definitely not doctors. And when someone's unconscious when you find them, that it's really not a good sign. And I was very worried at that point because we still had 2 days to any sort of medical aid, and that was to get to Patagonia, to South America, where there's really not much there anyways. Those are the moments which always keep me slightly careful, I would say. Whenever I'm on the boat by myself and we're really far from land, there's definitely this slightly uneasy, unnerving feeling where, when I'm at home like now, there's a hospital 10 minutes down the road. If I have a heart attack or something, and there's a good chance that they'll be able to help me. Whereas when we're in the ocean, even if you do a tiny thing, cut your finger, cut an artery, you're in big risk, you're in big danger. And it's almost, I would call it secondary fear, because I'm not instantaneously worried about falling over the boat. I think I always clip on, always try and be safe, but it's those things that you don't think about where, if I break my arm here, or if I get a horrible infection or something like this, that's the things that we have to be careful of when we're weeks away from any sort of hospital or proper medical aid. So that gives you this little funny feeling when you're in the middle of the ocean. Yeah.
Hmm. So Will, what do you think really marks you out and has marked you out from the rest of your generation of really strong sailors? What's different about you?
It's hard to put it exactly on one point, but I think I wouldn't be where I was today, or doing the racing I am today, without being really passionate for this sport. It came to me at exactly the right moment in my life when I'd just left home to go to university. I'd finished my sort of Olympic dream type sailing and dinghy racing, and discover this whole new sport, this whole new world of ocean racing, and the endurance aspect of it as well. And I was just so obsessed by it. All I could think about was, how can I train for this? How can I work on the navigation software? How can I get out on boats? And that's what I really spent my whole time. And I think I had to build up a lot of passion to be able to do that. But I think if I was to show up and be really passionate but be really annoying, I'm sure that wouldn't have got me anywhere. So I think one skill, or one thing that I really use nowadays is really trying to motivate a team. I think it's really important to be able to understand what sort of person do you need to be for everyone else. What do they need from you to get the best out of them, and what at the end of the day will tell them, okay, this, we really liked Will, we want him back, or we want him to do this, or he went that extra step. And I think I've got a good way of sort of reading people and understanding how to be the best team player effectively. And that's really important, especially nowadays where we have a big team, and it's really not just down to the sailor and the boat, it's down to the whole team behind us to get us to the start line and to have us with the boat as prepared as possible. I think nowadays, that navigation side of it, that's really sort of my stronger point. That's where I really love this sailing. I'm really into the technology and how we can use the computers to sort of give us a better picture of the routing, or the weather, or understanding of what the best route is based on based on polars, based on data analysis. And um, that I think is, it's hard to have that skill if you're not used to it in your sailing already, because, if you look at someone who hasn't grown up or hasn't sort of started their sailing career with those skills, it's really hard to integrate that into sort of a more old school sailor, I would say. So I try to bring that as much as possible. And that's definitely what I brought to a lot of sort of smaller projects that I was part of. I would try to come in there as the data analysis and the performer and try and use the data to help us perform and sort of take that responsibility off people. But yeah, I think the passion is the number one thing. You've got to be passionate to do it, and to be willing to sacrifice everything else to get the opportunities.
Well, it was really interesting what you said then about how you were able to join some of these top crews by understanding the mindset, understanding what you could offer. I think that's very relevant for any sailors trying to get into top crews. What's your sort of advice? What was your way of doing that?
Whenever you're part of a crew, I think what's important is to, even though there's always a hierarchy, you've got to have a skipper, you have a watch captain, maybe you have sort of different levels, and sometimes you don't define them, especially sort of at club racing level, you tend to not define them. It sort of just naturally falls into it like that. Whereas, and other teams, like, we really have to define it on a pro level, because we have to have a skipper to really make the final call if we're going to, abandon ship or something like this.
But when you say define it, do you mean that role is really clear what the responsibilities of that role
Well,
are?
so yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is there's hierarchies on boats, and the important thing, I think, is to try and break these down as much as possible. You don't necessarily need this chain of command always, and there shouldn't be someone above who doesn't have to do the things like sponging the bilges and things like this. Everyone being able to do a bit of everything and helping out with the bad jobs just as much as the good jobs, I think um, is really what I try to always bring to a team. I don't want to be seen as the one who just goes and sits over there and doesn't help with anything. I think everyone has to get stuck into it, and to try and bring that sort of attitude to every project, I think it's so underrated how much it's appreciated by other people, and doing those extra little things, the things that people don't want to do, that gets you the most brownie points, I think. And you'd underestimate how much more valuable our, now when I sail with other crew members, how much more I appreciate that over someone trying to prove that they can trim the sail better, or try to just talk more about other stuff. And that sort of mindset is, that's one little aspect of it, but that can go across with everything, whether maybe someone's having a hard time on the boat, or there's been a bit of a blowout, a crew fight or something. And sometimes people just need to talk for a minute, and you just try and be that. Often I'm very much a neutral person in that aspect. I almost never have conflicts on boats, and I think trying to be that person that every crew member can always talk to is always quite a useful aspect to have as well.
That's a really interesting answer. I remember a long time ago, I did a cross-channel race from Cowes to Cherbourg, and it was very cold, and it was very windy, and it was pretty nasty. And on our way out to the start line of the Cowes, of course, it was on a J109, a line got caught around the prop. So we're drifting, trying to get the beating up wind, trying to get to the start line on time. And we're sort of standing there realizing what had happened. And immediately, one of the young crew members strips off, dives overboard with obviously got a knife on his belt, immediately to figure it out. Didn't ask, we didn't didn't ask for volunteers. He just did it, which it's sort of, I've never forgotten that, because it sort of exemplifies the mindset that you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Those willing to, just do those things that no one else wants to do in that moment. And, jumping off the side, that's a pretty good example there. But it can be anything. But everyone just being there and helping out those extra little bits, and not just giving it to the one nipper who has to do all the rubbish jobs. That's not that's not, you really want to try and break down this hierarchy. And I think that's probably one of our strong points of Team Militia, is we all get on so well. It's much easier to have the fun side of the sailing when you get rid of those sorts of boundaries. I think, Boris, our skipper, is very good at not kind of creating these hierarchy levels.
Your key strength is, amongst many things, is navigation. That must give you quite an advantage in solo racing.
Yeah, I think the solo racing, really where I learned my navigation skills was through this solo racing in La Solitaire du Figaro. And that's really where I first sort of cut my teeth in learning these skills, because when you're solo on the boat, you are responsible for everything. You have to make sure you're not going to hit the rocks, you're not going to crash into someone else. Anything like that is
The
it's down to
basics.
you. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what you have to start with the navigation. It's very easy to overlook that. But the great thing about these solo racing in terms of teaching you these skills is you have to learn to be good at it, understand your route, and also be able to sail the boat well. It's very much like a dinghy. A dinghy,
Yeah,
you have to
ultimately.
choose where you need to go. Obviously, you don't have to look out for rocks so much, or you don't have to download weather files when you're dinghy sailing, but you have to choose your strategy and your tactics, and your navigation at the same time as trying to make the boat go fast. And number one of good tactics and good navigation is being as fast as possible. Firstly, good boat speed. So, can you do that and put the boat in the right direction? And then, if you do that, then you're going to put yourself in a really good place. And so, this world that I sort of started in the Solitaire de Figaro was the best platform I could have imagined as a sort of a young 20-year-old to then go to these more pro teams looking for professional navigators where there's a full crew on board, and they're looking for this one navigator to understand more the team as an overall. As the navigator, if you don't have that experience, you can't then say, oh, we've got to change the sail now when it's blowing 40 knots, or that's going to take way longer. Or you really have this good understanding of what you're asking from the crew and what's the priority at each point, because you're used to doing it totally alone by yourself. And, did that help me with the solo side as well? I think I would actually say it was the other way around. I would say my solo sailing has actually been improved by doing these navigation jobs on fully crewed boats. I think a really good example, it was last year, I raced in the Admiral's Cup and I raced in the Transat Café L'Or, which was a double-handed IMOCA race at the end of the year. And the Admiral's Cup was a fully crewed fastnet race amongst other
Yeah,
sort
there's
of.
3 or 4 races, aren't there, in the
Yeah,
Admiral's
exactly.
Cup? Yeah,
Yeah. And so it's a bit of a series, but that was really intense navigation job in the Admiral's Cup.
yeah.
I didn't touch a rope on board the boat. I sit on the computer screen and I stare at it and I try and figure out how to choose the best route to the finest detail, because we're fighting for meters there. And I think that experience that I had earlier on the year was really helpful for my Transat Café Law, where we finished second on, quite a major IMOCA race, probably the best result I've ever had. I think it was pretty fundamental in my navigation and sort of understanding of how do we really need to plan our route, and how do we look for those little meters to gain that 0.1% on our competitors, and that really helped the difference there. So actually, I would say it's almost the other way around, that the crew navigation role has actually helped my short-handed sailing, and hopefully the ocean race, which is only a crew of 4, it will also be useful for that.
Really interesting. I watched from afar, I watched the Fastnet race and the decision they make to go around Portland and which side of the Scilly Isles. I mean, that's crucial decisions where there was so much current and tide running.
Yeah, that part of the world is really my hunting grounds.
You know it, don't you? Yeah,
That's
yeah.
where I really learned my offshore sailing, and I've sailed past Portland Bill, past Anvil Point hundreds of times, and I think it was really down to what we did in the Fastnet that gave us the overall win in the Admiral's Cup, was thanks to looking for these extra little meters, playing with these extra little tidal gates that we knew really well, and actually gave us the advantage to then come out ahead in the Fastnet, which helped us in the overall series. But
Yeah.
I just, I absolutely love that when you can use those little features of the land, of the ocean to give you those advantages. And it was really from looking at the data from those hundreds of times that we've done it before, that we sat there for 2 days before the start of the Fastnet and went through every little detail and looked back at previous examples which looked similar. And it came down to the Fastnet and we knew exactly where we were going for the first 3 days of the race. And it was just amazing how well it went. And that gave me a lot of confidence going on into back to the IMOCA and to the TCO. And yeah, it's nice to see when you really put your mind to something, it pays off in the end.
That's a great lesson for, club racers, right? That there's a lot of data out there. So studying that data again and again and again may give you that advantage.
It was sort of a bit of trusting yourself as well. A bit of it for me this year. I'm still relatively young in the navigation scene, and whenever you actually get to the race, you might make a plan, and whenever you get to the race course, you might suddenly see, oh, your favorite skipper or your sort of idol skipper going another way, and it makes you question yourself. But if you believe in what you think is right, and you've had the experience, or you've trained it already, or you know why you think you're going over there, then you've just got to believe it. And the biggest error I think that we make in these sorts of racing, whether it's dinghy racing, whether it's offshore racing, is it's not trusting in your plan and making rash decisions, making last second decisions, which then throws you off your plan, and then you make a bad maneuver, and then you lose the boat speed. And if you can stick with your plan and just execute it smoothly, like you planned in your head, then then I think you end up doing a lot better.
Yeah, you make one mistake, it leads to other mistakes, and your head's not in the game, the crew's mad with you, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
okay, I get that, right? But let's take it back to a crude weekend regatta, where you might have a plan. You might think, okay, the current's going to start running at this time. It starts at noon. It's going to be well into a left-hand current here. The wind's going to clock round and that sort of thing. And so you've got your plan. You start your race, and the whole fleet goes left, and you've planned to go right. I mean, I know it happens to everybody in long-distance racing. That could be 500 miles of penalty that you have, but versus the others. But how do you, as a navigator, a sailor, and a skipper, how do you kind of reset yourself? Can you talk us through that, and maybe the mindset process that it takes for you to sort of get through that without blowing up?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. We see this in club racing, you see it in ocean racing like we do. It's just on different scales. Often when we're having decisions in ocean racing, it's a question of, are we going 500 miles north or 500 miles south, and are we going to arrive one day later, or are we going to arrive one day ahead? It's the same thing with any sort of racing. Club racing, for example, it's, are we going to arrive 1 or 2 hours ahead or behind? And when you have those moments where you've made your plan and you have the fleet going totally to the left when you thought you needed to go to the right, I think it comes down to the risk. You have to really reassess, what risk am I taking here? If it's the first time I've sailed in a place, and I don't know the currents like the back of my hand, then you're probably going to want to stick with the fleet. You're probably making some sort of mistake. But if it's your hundredth time there, and you know it really well, and you're really sure, adamant that you're right, then why not? If you think that the option you're taking is the less risky one, then you've got to go for it. And I think that goes for all sorts of decisions. Is there a wind shift coming ahead? Is it really unknown what's happening ahead? And you have to just look at each scenario and assess the risk in each one. Is the wind really shifty today? And if I go to the other side of the course, is there a big chance that the fleet's going to be totally ahead of me? Or I'm going to get really lucky the other way? And do I need to manage my risk and actually stay with the fleet because we don't really know what's happening? Or is it a fixed thing? Is it, okay, there's definitely going to clock right. I'm so sure of this that I really don't see there being much risk. And the question of leverage as well. How much are you separating yourself? And, in ocean racing, there's lots of examples which I think come down to much smaller races as well. In ocean racing, there'll be some decisions which come down to a matter of hundreds of meters, are really not big distances, which then open up into hundreds of miles sometimes. And we experience that a lot, where just being 1 mile ahead in the doldrums means you're ahead of the cloud, which then means you can sail at 25 knots, and in 5 hours they're 100 miles ahead. And we saw that a few times in the ocean race. I think that can happen very easily in club racing. Are you positioning yourself 5 meters to windward, 5 meters to leeward of the fleet? And how's that going to impact you when you get to the top mark, for example? Or how's that going to impact you when the shift comes? And it's just all on different scales. And sometimes there's moments which are, there's less risky decisions. Maybe there's a big leverage in the fleet. You've got a big separation, but the wind is super stable. So you're all going to end up at the top mark anyway. So you're happy that you've got that separation and you're taking that risk. So, it's hard to put it down to each decision, but I think it's all down to experience. The more times you do it, definitely in the navigation and the ocean racing world, the more times you do it, the better you generally get at decision making. So I think that definitely goes for the same for any sort of racing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I could hear the decision gates that you're going through in your head in terms of leverage, where are we, what that means. For a professional sailor like yourself, risk management, especially in offshore racing, must be the key discipline to understand and deal with, because I'm guessing as much as the risk around navigation decisions, when you're racing these boats at the limit, right? IMOCA 60 in the Southern Ocean doing whatever it is, 40 knots, fully foiled. There's enormous areas of risk around the stability of the boat, whether the equipment's going to fail or whatever, with potentially catastrophic results. So presumably risk management is just a natural skill that you have or you picked up over time.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's, especially in ocean racing, we've got this added element of, we're not just talking about the risk in competition and racing and positioning. We're talking about risk in terms of danger and safety, and what are we putting ourselves into for gain in terms of on the race course and things like that. And I think a really example that comes straight to my mind is the start of this Transat Cafe Law race, which I recently finished second with our racing in, and we're two sailors on an IMOCA 60, and we had to exit the English Channel from Le Havre in about 40 to 45 knots of wind, and then we're straight reaching down towards the Portuguese coast. And we really had to plan everything meticulously in order to just survive that period. We had to get that boat in one piece down to Cap Finisterre in about 3 days' time, and with ourselves in one piece, and try and be in a good position as well. So I remember looking at the sort of 40-hour plan we'd made before the start, and it said, right, we've got about 5 tacks to do. We've got about 3 reefs to take the reefs out again, and 1 or 2 sail changes. And we looked back at the data after the race, and I think we had about 8,000 calories a day worth of energy expenditure. And on the log, we had about 2 hours sleep each in 3 days. It really shows, even though the plan went really well, we were super happy with how it went. We were in the top 3. It was exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And we were really lucky that the plan went exactly to how we wanted to. We'd managed to not take too much risk. We had kept the boat in one piece. We'd kept ourselves in one piece. And they really tied together, these two things, your risk management of yourself and the boat, and the risk management with the fleet, and having to assess each situation. Is it light winds? Is it strong winds? How do we get out of this situation in the best scenario? And by just keeping ourselves and the boat in one piece and not taking any rash, risky decisions, we'd ended up in the top 3. And I think when that goes into things like the Southern Ocean as well, when we go to these more extreme parts of the planet, not to say the English Channel can't be pretty extreme, but down there, you have to really assess each situation. Are we putting ourselves in the middle of a depression? If we, because as soon as you start having problems, usually what happens is you put yourself in a too full-on situation, you have a problem or you make a mistake, the boat breaks, and then you start putting yourself at risk as well. You have to go out, you have to fix the boat to get it 100%. A good example was we were pushing too hard in the ocean race, leg 3 from Cape Town to Brazil, and we broke the sail at the top of the mast, and we actually made a big crack in the mast, and I ended up spending 2 days at the top of the mast trying to repair this thing, which we managed to repair. But that was at a lot of risk. The mast swinging 5 or 6 meters side to side, being
A lot of personal risk
against the mast, and that was from us pushing too hard too early on. And I think we have to really take that extra few seconds to really assess every situation. Is this going to get us to the finish line first? And how much risk are we taking in order to do that?
I think I started out by saying there's risk in navigation competition and also the boat itself, but I hadn't really thought about there's risk in terms of, are you pushing yourself? As a risk of your body, mind, presumably failing. Okay, well, I know on the horizon for you is this dream of doing the Vendée, which I can quite clearly see you doing. What's your plan for that? Is it 2028? The next one, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So the next Vendée Globe is 2028, every 4 years. And I would say the Vendée Globe is sort of my ultimate goal. It's really the Everest for me of my sport. I'm 31 now. It's we're very lucky in this sailing world that we have a slightly longer career than, say, a footballer, for example. But getting there is quite a journey. At the moment, I'm part of Team Militia. I'm going to be competing the next ocean race with them around the world. But really, my sort of other focus at the moment, other goal, is trying to find partners and sponsors who will help me fund in IMOCA 60 to then be on the start line myself, competing in the Vendée Globe in 2028. And it's the biggest challenge for us as sailors. How do we put on this other cap of being a businessman and trying to sell it to sponsors to try and sell them the value of ocean racing in order to fund these boats, these cutting edge racing machines, and to have an opportunity, a chance to try and sort of make history, become the first non-French winner of the race. So that's definitely my challenge alongside my sailing. So, half the time I've got my hat on of trying to be the best sailor possible. I've got to do this if I want a chance of trying to win it. If I don't try and be the best sailor possible, then there's no point in finding the sponsor, because I won't be in for a very good chance of winning it. So it's really about trying to find this balance at the moment. I'm really lucky to have what I have at Team Elixir, and to get to have all this experience in IMOCAs. But now I need to, the next step for me is finding my own boat and having my own project to then be on the start line and be in for a chance. So always working on it.
We've talked to Pip Hare before, who's done the Vendée, and she's brilliant at telling that story. And, both of you UK sailors, you'd think there would be some UK sponsors who'd step up to sort of fly the flag, just given it's dominated by overseas sailors, right? It's opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating situation because, if we really look back in history, it was Robin Knox-Johnson,
Yeah, of course.
who won the first Golden Globe race. Since then, it's really been taken over by the French. And, I'm very much a British sailor. I like to think myself as British, even though I'm living here in France now. But it's still making history if you can be the first non-French sailor. It's not just solely British. And it's one of the few things in sailing left out there to try and achieve, I think, in ocean racing. And I think the other side is really not many sports out there which can offer sort of the planet as a race course. That's the coolest thing about this sport for me, is the fact that we go all over the world in order to finish a race. I don't think there's any other sport out there which is quite like that. So I think those are the two really fascinating points to our sport. I'm really hoping it's gonna happen one day for me, but at the same time, I'm very lucky with the racing and the sailing that I get to do, and what I have done already.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for taking the time with Sailfaster to talk about where you've been and where you're going. Great to talk to you. Great to meet you. I really look forward to following your continuing career in offshore racing. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Pete, and very much enjoyed being part of the Sailfaster podcast.